I was sitting across from my husband's mistress in a coffee shop when she looked at me and said, "He told me you knew. He said you were fine with it." I wasn't fine with it. I'd found out 3 days earlier. And what she didn't know was that I'd already spoken to a lawyer, a forensic accountant, and his boss. My husband thought I was too weak to leave. He was about to find out how wrong he was. My name is Claire, and I'm 34 years old. I was married to David for 9 years. We met in college. He was charming, ambitious, confident. We got married when I was 25. For the first few years, things were good. He worked in commercial real estate. I was a graphic designer working from home. We had a nice house in the suburbs. No kids yet, but we were planning. Or at least I thought we were. David traveled a lot for work. Conferences, client meetings, site visits. I trusted him. I had no reason not to. Until I found a receipt in his jacket pocket for a hotel room in our own city. A room he'd checked into on a Tuesday night when he told me he was working late at the office. I didn't confront him immediately. I wanted to be sure, so I checked our credit card statements. There were charges I didn't recognize. Dinners at expensive restaurants I'd never been to. Jewelry I'd never received. Flowers I'd never seen. I installed a tracking app on his phone while he was in the shower. I told myself I was being paranoid. But the app showed me the truth. He wasn't at the office. He was at an apartment across town. An apartment I didn't know existed. That's when I hired a private investigator. 3 days later, I had photos. David with a woman named Amanda. Kissing her in a parking lot. Holding her hand at a restaurant. Going into her apartment and not leaving until morning. The first time I caught David in a lie, I didn't realize it was part of a pattern. It was 6 months into our marriage. He told me he was going on a business trip to Chicago for 3 days. He came back with photos from the trip. Him at a conference. Him with clients. But when I asked about the hotel, he got defensive. He said, "Why are you interrogating me? Don't you trust me?" I apologized. I felt guilty for questioning him. Looking back, that was the moment he learned he could gaslight me. That was the moment he realized I'd accept his lies if he made me feel bad for doubting him. The second time, it was more obvious. It was our 5th anniversary. I'd planned a special dinner at home. I cooked his favorite meal. I bought champagne. I waited for him to come home. He texted me at 7 p.m. saying he'd be late. Client emergency. He texted again at 9 p.m., still dealing with it. At 11 p.m., I called him. He didn't answer. He came home at 1 a.m., smelling like perfume. I asked him where he'd been. He said, "I told you." "Client emergency, why don't you believe me?" I said, "You smell like perfume." He said, "It's probably from the client. She's very affectionate. Hugs everyone." But I didn't have proof. So, I let it go. The third time, I found a text message. He'd left his phone on the kitchen counter while he was in the shower. A message popped up from a contact saved as Mike from work. The message said, "Last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about you." I opened the thread. There were dozens of messages. Intimate messages. Photos, plans to meet. I took screenshots. When David came out of the shower, I confronted him. I showed him the messages. He looked at the phone, then at me, and he laughed. He actually laughed. He said, "You went through my phone." "That's a violation of privacy, Claire." I said, "Who is Mike from work?" He said, "It's exactly what it says. A coworker. We're close friends." "You're reading into things that aren't there." I said, "These messages aren't friendly. They're romantic." He said, "You're being paranoid. This is exactly why I don't tell you things. You twist everything." And then he walked out. He stayed at a hotel that night. When he came back the next day, he acted like nothing had happened. That was 3 months ago. I didn't leave. I wanted to. But I was scared of being alone. Scared of starting over. Scared that maybe he was right and I was just paranoid, so I stayed. And he kept lying, and I kept pretending I believed him. Until 2 weeks ago, David told me he was going to a conference in San Diego for 4 days. He showed me the itinerary. He kissed me goodbye. He told me he loved me. And then he left. But I knew he was lying. Because I'd been tracking his phone. And his phone wasn't in San Diego. It was 20 minutes away at Amanda's apartment. I drove there. I sat in my car across the street for 2 hours. And then I saw him. Walking out of her building. Holding her hand. Laughing. He looked happier than I'd seen him in years. I took photos. I took videos. And then I went home. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't break things. I just sat on the couch and thought about what to do next. That's when I realized I wasn't sad. I was angry. And I wasn't gonna let him get away with this. The next morning, I called a divorce lawyer. Her name was Karen Mitchell. I told her everything. I showed her the photos, the text messages, the credit card statements. She said, "You have a strong case. Especially if there are shared assets." I said, "We own a house together. We have a joint savings account. He has a 401k. She said, "Good. In this state, infidelity can impact asset division. Especially if he used marital funds to support the affair." I asked what that meant. She said, "It means if he spent your money on her, you can argue for a larger share of the assets." I said he spent thousands. She smiled. Then let's make sure you get what you're owed. Karen referred me to a forensic accountant named Stephen Price. I met with him 2 days later. I gave him access to our bank statements, credit card records, everything. He worked fast. Within 3 days, he had a report. David had spent over $47,000 on Amanda in the past 18 months. Dinners, hotels, jewelry, trips. He'd even paid her rent twice when she was between jobs. All of it came from our joint account. Money I'd contributed to, money I'd earned. Stephen said, "This is financial misconduct. In a divorce, this gives you significant leverage." I asked what would happen. He said, "Your lawyer can argue that he dissipated marital assets. The court can order him to reimburse you. Or they can award you a larger portion of the remaining assets. But I didn't just want money. I wanted him to face consequences. So I did something I hadn't planned. I called Amanda. I found her number in David's phone records. I texted her from a burner number and asked to meet. I told her I had information about David she needed to hear. She agreed. We met at a coffee shop. She was younger than I expected, 26, pretty, nervous. I sat down and said, "I'm David's wife." Her face went white. She said, "He told me you knew. He said you had an open marriage." I shook my head. "We don't. He's been lying to both of us." She started crying. She said, "I had no idea. He told me you were separated, that you were living in different parts of the house while you figured out the divorce." I showed her photos of David and me, from last month, smiling, together. She covered her mouth. She said, "I'm so sorry. I never would have if I'd known." I said, "I believe you. But I need your help." She looked at me. I said, "I need you to tell the truth, to my lawyer. To anyone who asks, I need you to confirm that David lied to you, that he used our money to support you." She nodded. "I'll do whatever you need." 2 days later, Karen filed for divorce. David was served at work. I wasn't there, but his coworker told me later that he went pale. That he called me 17 times in the next hour. I didn't answer. He came home that night. I'd changed the locks. He pounded on the door. I opened it but didn't let him in. He said, "What the hell is this?" I said, "It's a divorce." He said, "You can't just kick me out. This is my house too." I said, "Actually, according to my lawyer I can. You've been using marital funds to support an affair. That's financial misconduct. I have documentation." His face changed. "You've been spying on me." I said, "You've been lying to me." He said, "Claire, let's talk about this. We can work this out." I said, "No, we can't." He tried a different approach. He softened his voice. "I made a mistake. I'm sorry. But we've been together for 9 years. You're just gonna throw that away." I said, "You threw it away when you cheated on me. When you lied to me. When you spent our money on her." He said it wasn't that much. I pulled out the forensic report. $47,000. Over 18 months. Hotels, dinners, jewelry, rent. All from our joint account. His jaw dropped. "You had an accountant go through our finances?" I said, "I did. And my lawyer is going to use this report in court." He said, "You're making a huge mistake. You'll regret this." I said, "The only thing I regret is not doing it sooner." And I closed the door. But I wasn't done. David worked for a commercial real estate firm. A prestigious company with a strict ethics policy. I knew because I'd read their employee handbook. It specifically stated that employees were expected to maintain integrity in their personal and professional lives. I also knew that David had been having the affair with Amanda, who was a junior associate at a competing firm. And I knew that David had shared confidential client information with her. I knew because I'd seen the emails. He'd forwarded her internal documents. Market analyses. Client lists. He thought he was impressing her. What he'd actually done was committed a fireable offense. I called David's boss, Richard Callahan. I didn't accuse David directly. I just said, "I think there's something you should know. My husband has been in a relationship with someone at a competing firm, and I've seen emails where he shared confidential company information." Richard thanked me and said he'd look into it. 2 days later, David was called into a meeting with HR. They'd found the emails. They'd confirmed he'd violated company policy. He was fired, not laid off, fired. For cause, which meant no severance, no references, nothing. David showed up at the house 3 days later. He looked terrible, unshaven, disheveled. He said, "You got me fired." I said, "No. You got yourself fired. You broke company policy." He said, "You called my boss. You told him about Amanda." I said, "I told him the truth. What he did with that information was his decision." He said, "You've destroyed my life." I said, "You destroyed our marriage. I just made sure there were consequences." He tried to get angry. "I'll fight you in court." "You're not taking everything." I said, "Actually, I am. You dissipated marital assets. You committed adultery. You violated the prenup." He froze. "What prenup?" I smiled. "The one you signed before we got married. The one that says if either of us commits adultery, the other party gets the house, the savings, and the retirement accounts." He said, "That's not enforceable." I said, "According to my lawyer it is. Especially with the evidence I have." He collapsed onto the porch steps. "Claire, please. I'm sorry. I made a mistake. But you don't have to do this." I looked at him. "You laughed at me when I found those text messages. You called me paranoid. You made me feel crazy for 3 years. And now you want mercy. He started crying. Real tears. I'll lose everything. I said good. Maybe you'll learn something. The divorce was finalized 6 weeks later. I got the house. I got 70% of the savings. I got his 401k. He got his car and whatever personal belongings he could fit in it. Amanda left him 2 weeks after he was fired. She sent me a message as thank you for telling me the truth. I'm sorry for the pain I caused. I didn't respond. David tried to fight the settlement. His lawyer filed a motion, but Karen had every piece of evidence ready. The forensic report, the photos, the text messages, Amanda's sworn statement. The prenup. The judge ruled in my favor. David was ordered to pay my legal fees, all of them. $23,000. That was 6 months ago. David is living in a studio apartment. He's working at a smaller firm for half his previous salary. He's still trying to rebuild his career. I sold the house. I didn't want to live there anymore. Too many bad memories. I moved to a smaller place closer to the city. I started my own design business. It's doing well. Better than I expected. I'm happy. Actually happy. Not pretending. Not settling. Just genuinely at peace. David sent me an email last month. He said he was sorry. That he understood why I did what I did. That he hoped I could forgive him someday. I didn't respond. Not because I'm angry. But because I don't need to. Forgiveness isn't something I owe him. It's something I gave myself when I stopped accepting his lies. People ask me if I regret how hard I went after him. If I feel guilty for getting him fired. For taking everything. I don't. Because he didn't just cheat. He lied. He gaslit me. He made me question my sanity. He spent years making me feel small. And when I finally stood up for myself, he laughed. So no, I don't regret it. He cheated, lied, and laughed. And my revenge cost him everything. And I'd do it again.